Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Policy and Resources, the festive version of Policy and Resources. I'll just go through the usual preamble and then we'll crack on with the meeting. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Okay. Item 1 on the agenda, appointment of substitutes. Julie?
Chair, yes. Andrew Cross is here for Steve Cockburn. Karen Roberts is here for Mel Orcott. And just note David Blake has sent his apologies.
Thank you very much. Welcome both. Okay. Item 2, declarations of interest. Okay. Lynn, Robin and Stephen. Lynn.
Just for absolute transparency, that Shrub Hill is within my county council division.
Okay, thank you. Jabba? Okay, thank you. Robin?
Chair, as Chair of PED, I'm also on the Shrub Hill Steering Committee.
Thank you very much. And Stephen?
Yeah, item 6 does have to refer to Warden Parish Council, and I'm a Warden Parish Councillor.
Excellent, thank you. Item 3, public representations. Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. I'll just go through them page by page and then pause at the end for any comment or questions. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Anything there anybody wants to make reference to? Okay, I'll happily sign that. The income management minutes, I think I was the only one present there who was in the room tonight, so I'll sign those off at the end of the meeting. Right, good, thanks. Item 6, draft MTFP. Shane.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. And well, here we are again in terms of a budget for another year. We've just very recently had some news about the settlement, which I'll take you through. But just in overall terms, by way of introducing the report, its primary purpose is to set the council tax base. A recommendation to I'm asking if you're happy to approve that so that the precepting bodies can get on and set their council taxes for the coming year. Then, as normal, this is a sort of the preliminary part. It is a draft budget. This is the first stage of the budget cycle, really. So we'll go through all of our committees in January and look at this in more detail, give you plenty of time to explore the various elements of it, and then come back to committee in early February to set the final version of the budget, which will then go on to council for agreement. In terms of some of the highlights that we want to draw your attention, first of all, it seems a bit perverse to say, but if you look at the table on the paragraph 5.3 on page 17, I'm delighted to say that the forecast budget gap is 378,000. In the context of what this time last year was a budget gap of 2.25 million, that is a tremendous achievement, which everyone's put in an awful lot of hard work to get us to this stage. So I'm extremely grateful for everybody for participating in that and recognising the seriousness of the issue. As you will see, as we go forward, obviously that then increases again. The increase up to 1.2 million is what, 900,000 or so, and it's primarily driven by expectations around increasing inflation and salary costs, and also the fact that some of the things that we've put in this year are relatively short term, like increased interest rates, which need to be unwound, and various things like that. So there's some short-term elements which has brought us down to the 378,000, which we'll need to reconsider as we go into next year. So although we've made huge progress, there is still work to do. It's an ongoing piece of work to try and get us to a position where our income and our costs are increasing in a relatively proportionate way, which I'm sure we will do in the fullness of time. Having said that, there are a couple of things which are included in the assumptions there, which we just need to be clear about. The first is that we've assumed a 2.99% increase in council tax, which is at paragraph 5.11. The government's settlement yesterday have confirmed that that is available, and they take that into account when assessing core spending power. So you'll have seen this headline that there is a 6.5% increase in core spending power across the board. In terms of this council, that amounts to 4.8%. So it's a bit lower than some other councils are getting, but that assumes the 2.99% increase in council tax already. So if we don't do that, then the amount of our core spending power won't go up by quite so much. The other bit that we need to agree in February is the overall income inflation which we've allowed for, and that 6% is across the board. So it's a general figure. The Income Management Committee will receive the details of that at its January meeting and recommend those on to Policy and Resources. Just to confirm that at paragraph 5.15, that includes an assumption that that 6% applies to car parking charges, as well as all our other income changes. The rest I'll leave to you to consider, but just want to draw your attention to a couple of things which are coming up in the future, which we need to take into account. So I've just commented on these, really, which is section 1.8 called Future Challenges on page 27. And it's just really to highlight the fact that there are things which we haven't yet been able to take into account because we don't really know what these might look like in the future. But we're aware, for example, that the leisure contract is due for renewal. And at the moment, we receive income of 450,000 or so net from that contract. It's unlikely that in the future we'll continue to receive that income when we come to the renewal. We might actually move to a position where we are paying the contractor, as many other leisure contractors do. So that's something that's coming along the lines, which we've got to think about. We know that we've got to refurbish the crematorium and replace the cremators, and we'll hear a report about that later on this agenda, but that's going to be a significant cost, and there will be a period of income loss while we're doing that. So it's something we'll have to think about in the future. We know that the government is committed to food waste collection. We don't yet know what the implications of that will be, so we haven't built that into the medium-term financial plan, except in the capital programme where we've assumed £1 million of purchases for equipment, which we expect to be funded by government, but we'll wait and see. In respect of the Scala Arts project, Arts Centre project, we're anticipating that there might be some period where we've got to fund from revenue that activity once it's up and running, just to get it onto a proper footing. So something to consider there. We've heard quite a bit about ash dieback recently. We know that's a growing issue. As yet, we've not set aside significant sums to deal with that, and it's something that we will have to attend to in the fullness of time. And then finally, we've done quite a bit of work on our air quality action plan. I'm sure there are going to be some commitments following from that in due course as well. There may be other pressures which we've not yet taken into account. These are ones which we know are coming, but haven't been included in the medium-term financial planners yet. So just wanted to draw your attention to those. And then finally, just one last bit which we'll need to do in February is agree the change in reserves. At the moment, we've got reasonable position in terms of our business rate risk reserves. So we've got enough to cover that 378,000 gap if we need to draw on reserves to do that. But we have also been looking at some of the existing reserves and reviewing whether we need those. And Appendix 4 on page 37 runs through a list of reserves we think we can be released. In total, that's £574,000. But that will actually be required to fund the voluntary redundancy exercise that we did during this year. So it's not going to free up money to be available to spending on other things, but it will mean that those commitments we've made can be met from reserves without having to draw on other revenue impacts. Okay, so there are a few pressures coming up, much to do between now and February, but all the committees will have an opportunity to engage in that process, ask more detailed questions than you may have tonight. But if there are any things that immediately you'd like to know more about, then Mark and I will be happy to try and answer them. Thank you.
Shane, thanks very much. Questions or comment, please? Oh, beg your pardon, Marjorie.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say what a great achievement it is to bring down the budget gap from 2.5 million to 378. I've also got a few questions. in Appendix 2, we've got the Comer Gardens Institute facility area, and I think we're going to reconsider that. It has come up in a recent meeting.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. When a number of items were put in the capital programme as a reserve, to be reserved in the capital programme, always subject to a detailed business case. So that funding won't be released until we've had that detailed business case come through to committee.
And excuse me, I mean, I might just be being thick, but there's something that I struggle with in Appendix 4, which is why, for example, with the Ward Recovery Fund, it's 15,303 at the end of March 24, and exactly the same at the end of March 27.
Through you, Chair, that's the member recovery fund, isn't it? Well, that was the amount which was left over. Is that right? No? Yeah, so that was the amount that was left over. So we're not anticipating adding anything to that. So the balance, the table shows the balance we're expecting at 31st of 24, and then we try to take into account any known commitments from that balance, so we don't nick that and forget about things which are forthcoming, or in some cases where extra money is added into the balance every year, so it goes back up. So we're not expecting any of that 30, how much is it? 15,303 to be used. It's already been assumed that would be released back into budgets because it was an underspend at the year end. So it's available to be released. That not available to spend. So the 15,303 was what's left of the balance previously, the previous year. It's the previous year's underspent. So in effect, it's due to be released. It's not available for spending. So it's there and we can use it. Yeah. There is the balance that's remaining in this financial year needs to be spent, everybody, by the 31st of March, or else you will lose it. That's the way that we run it.
Finally, we should all make sure we spend this year's. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Stephen.
Yes, thank you very much for this paper. Yes, I am pleased we are going to be okay for the coming financial year with these savings you have made. I must admit, our group, if we've been in control of the City Council, we would probably think slightly differently, but we are where we are. I just have a simple question, really. When it comes to two things, first of all, the IDASH back contingency, we don't know what that final figure is going to be yet, but are we likely to see some contingency in the actual budget when we vote for that in February? And also, secondly, I notice you're talking about your income streams, and you talk about your car parking, and you're talking about a 6% increase in parking charges next year. Assuming that is indeed the case, we are giving our competitors quite an advantage by actually telling them that we're going to be increasing our charges by 6%, whereas I guess the likes of Crowngate and the NCP and that won't be letting it publicly known what they're going to be doing to the car parking charges. So just we have to be mindful that we aren't the only car park operator in the city, and if we want to achieve the revenue streams we expect to do, obviously, do we take into account competitive pressures that might drive down our potential anticipated income?
Through you, Chair. Lloyd might like to add more in terms of the car parking, but our assessment in terms of our competitors, our car parking charges are very low compared to them. So we don't think that the increase of 6% is it's purely in line with inflation. It's unreasonable. But just to reiterate, this is the draft budget, so it's a matter for members to decide at the February committee whether they actually want to go ahead with that or not. It's a proposal, and it's just built in order to illustrate the position.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Stephen, can you remind me of the first question? Ash dieback, yes, certainly. There is a report going to Environment Committee in January, and if that then is sufficient to enable us to calculate a reasonable reserve, then that's what will be put forward.
I've got Pat next.
Thank you, Chair. A few things really. One on page 18, which is the cost of making bids. And we know there's quite a large cost of making bids in terms of staff time and possible consultancy fees and so forth. And there's some idea that we might actually move towards cost recovery, possibly even full cost recovery. I wonder how sympathetic you think the government is going to be towards that. So that's one thing. Whether or not we can integrate it within a bid. The increase in development management fees is very welcome. And I do note the staggering rise in the audit fee, which is absolutely appalling. 107k additional expenditure. I mean, is there any way of negotiating that downwards?
Through you, Chair. On the first point, Pat, as we've seen that drift in terms of capital funding over the last couple of years, the government has built more and more into a revenue element into that to allow for project capacity. And also they do tend to front up funding for the development of bids. To do in terms of that. So I think that should be okay. I mean, the key thing is actually to be able to be in a position to continue to obtain grants. And so we need to build up the capacity to do that. And of course, you're always looking at new burdens funding and short-term funding, which makes that difficult, but it's a challenge that we've been working on. In terms of the rising audit fee, the simple answer is no. There is no opportunity to negotiate that. The process that has been played out in public over the last 2 years or so is that many of those providing audit services have come to the conclusion that they can't deliver to a standard that they expect within the fee rates, which were set 4 or 5 years ago when the PSAA was established. They have come to recognise that those scale fees were too low, set too low. They don't allow that. So it's been a long process of negotiating with the firms as to what they think is a reasonable price to pay. We bought into that process as a council about a year or so ago now. We had the opportunity then to try and source our own auditors if we wanted to, but 99% of councils across the country bought into this negotiation process. So we have to accept what's on the table, I'm afraid.
This is such a staggering amount that it's difficult to understand how they could be so far astray in their costing. I don't mean we are, I mean the companies that do this.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions or comment? Lynn Denham.
I mean, the answer to that question is bring back the audit commission, isn't it? And it was a mistake on the part of government to outsource what is an important public service function. Thank you for the presentation and you know, for all the work that sits behind this. To be clear, in terms of the decision that we're making at committee today, it's to sign off what our council tax base is, isn't it? So that we can work out our budget as well as the parish councils and the county council. I mean, having received exactly what our settlement is, it just illustrates central government is not funding local government fairly, and you know we're kind of living hand to mouth, and the amount of money that we get is not related to need, is not related to the services that we provide. I'm sure we'll all continue to do the best that we can and hope that our residents don't blame us for what it is that we're faced with in terms of the budget and the numbers. Thank you.
Can I just
Yeah,
comment
please
on
do,
that,
yes.
Chair, if I may?
Absolutely, yeah.
In terms of the Audit Commission, you know, I wholeheartedly agree, except for the fact that if the Audit Commission hadn't been abolished, I wouldn't be here. No, I'd still be working for them. So it's an ill wind, as they say. In terms of the last point about overall funding, you know, the core message has been there's an average increase of 6.5% in core spending power in this last year. But since that concept of core spending power was introduced in 2015-16, our total increase over those years is 6%. Now, if inflation had applied, they'd simply taken the grant as it was in 2015-16 and applied inflation across the board, that would have risen by 25%. We'd be £3.1 million better off than we are now. So you can see the real term cut in funding. And just running through the columns of figures which have been provided today, that some authorities in the country have received increases over that period of 50%, as opposed to 6%. And what's the, you know, this is down to new homes bonus and sort of different funding streams. There is one poor authority has actually gone down by -1% over that period. So we're not the worst off, but it does just show that the system at the moment isn't reflecting need. It's not geared to need. It's just rolling forward a baseline which was established some time ago, and there is a need for radical reform. And that's one of the reasons why we continue to keep back 1.4 million in our business race reserve. We need to keep that because at some point they're going to have to reset this system, and that's the extent of the growth over and above what the government has provided at that time. So we just need to keep our eye on that. But yeah, the overall conclusion is its system isn't fair. It isn't based on need, but it is what it is.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions or comment? Eleanor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted, because I'm the new kid on the block here, having only been elected in May, I'm just trying to understand Appendix 3. Could you just clarify where it's got disabled Band A? Is this number of properties where residents have applied for a discretion to their council tax because they've got a separate room for a disabled occupant? Or can you just clarify those figures in that column? I'm not quite sure what it means.
Through you, Chair, I'd have to look in detail what the definition is, but yes, it's for a certain category of council taxpayers who've had special circumstances that apply. So yes, they can apply for it. I'll get you an answer, Eleanor. I'll have to look it up in detail. Don't know it off the top of my head, but yes, it's for a specific category of people. Unless Mark, you know.
Mark, no. Okay, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a clarification or a little question. In Appendix 4, we've got 26 street signage, and it says that all works to date have been funded from base budget. Does that mean in the future the funding for replacing worn and damaged street signage will continue to come from base budget? And is that enough? Are we replacing our worn and damaged street signage quickly enough to keep up with the wear and tear of our street signs in the city? Thank you.
The work that's been done so far has been done out of the annual revenue budget. That was a specific reserve that was created 2 or 3 years ago as a member request, but it hasn't been necessary to use it because the work that's been needed has been done from the annual revenue budget. Hence, we're at the position now where we can afford to release that reserve. No.
Does that therefore mean that we've got enough money in this budget to continue our work for replacing damaged and worn out signs?
Based on the demand we currently see, so that's requests from members or proactive sort of replacement of signs, then we're currently covering that from revenue budget. If there was an influx of requests that we didn't foresee, then possibly we would need to look elsewhere. Our current demand is being met through the revenue budget.
Thank you, Lloyd. Any further? Marjorie.
Will there be some comms, a press release at a suitable stage explaining that, you know, the situation that we don't have enough funds to do everything we want to do?
Through you, Chair, yes, Rob's drafted an email which is sitting for me to look at first thing in the morning. So.
Excellent, thank you. And, okay, I'm not seeing anyone else. Just, excuse me, from my perspective, as Stephen has alluded to, there were details that we were in disagreement with, but I think what the overriding thing is that we've approached as a council this situation with a serious head, and I think that is to be commended. So, as chairman of this particular committee, I thank everyone for that. So, I'm not looking around the room, no one else wishes to comment, so I'm going to take the recommendations. I mean, they are quite lengthy, but we know in essence what we're looking to approve here. So if we take 1.1, 2, 3 and 4, does anybody need any clarification, or are we happy to go? Right, so show of hands please, are those who are willing to accept those?
Chair, that's carried.
Thank you very much. To item 7, community infrastructure levy draft charging schedule. Duncan, sorry.
Chair, I'll just
Yes,
I'll
please.
just start us off whilst our head of planning comes to the table. So the reason that this is on your agenda tonight, committee, is that we are seeking a committee mandate to start a consultation on the proposed new charging schedule for our community infrastructure levy. This is across the 3 South Worcestershire councils. The community infrastructure levy charging schedule effectively forms part of the council's planning policy framework. Ordinarily, it would be considered by the Place and Economic Development Committee and ultimately signed off by full council, which it needs to be. Because of the timing of our committee cycle and the fact that we're expecting to be in examination on the local plan early-ish next year, we were keen to get a mandate from committee to commence the consultation, and this was the best opportunity to do that, then commence the consultation. And the matter needs to be reported back to full council in any event. So that's why it's here tonight, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. Anything you want to add at this point, Duncan, or should we go to questions? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just to add a little bit of detail. As I'm sure members are aware, community infrastructure levy is justified based on a gap in infrastructure funding, and community infrastructure levy receipts are intended to bridge this gap and support development up to 2041 in the case of the new draft charging schedule, development that is either allocated or is windfall development coming through in the future as part of the review of the South Worcestershire Development Plan. The review has identified the potential to increase community infrastructure levy rates, and those are set out on page 9 of the draft charging schedule. And the recommendation is to apply the new rates geographically, and you'll also see in the draft charging schedule on page 8 that this is explained with reference to a map. So whereas at the moment our current charging schedule is a series of flat rates across the whole of South Worcestershire, the recommendation, informed by work that our viability consultants have undertaken on our behalf, is proposing a geographical split between what their research has identified as a higher development value and a lower development value area. That's shown on that SIL charging map by the red and the green shading. The proposed rates set out in the table on page 9 are broken down into different types of development. So, for example, greenfield and brownfield, schemes of less than 9 units, schemes of 10 units or more, It is also broken down relating to higher density flatted development on brownfield land, purpose-built student accommodation, age-restricted sheltered housing schemes, extra care or assisted living schemes, and you'll see at the bottom of the table of particular note, strategic sites that are allocated in the emerging plan or are schemes of over 1,000 units would be 0 rated. That may initially be cause for concern, but it's worth noting that the strategic sites in our current development plan, particularly the urban extensions, are already 0 rated. That is simply a reflection that the infrastructure costs associated with that scale of development are so huge that they can't be expected to carry the normal Section 106 costs and community infrastructure levy. They would simply be unviable to the point where they're unlikely to come forward. And that's the critical test. To set community infrastructure levy rates too high would risk developers developing elsewhere in the country, and therefore we wouldn't see the level of particularly housing and affordable housing, all important affordable housing, coming forward within the plan period. So, as per the recommendation before you at paragraphs 1.1 and 1.2, the recommendation is that this committee approves the SIL draft charging schedule for public consultation. That would be for a period of 6 weeks in the new year. And the second part of the recommendation to authorise the Corporate Director for Planning and Governance in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Place and Economic Development Committee, for the reasons that Sian explained earlier, to make any necessary amendments to the schedule prior to public consultation. It may be helpful to note that the SIL draft charging schedule has already been approved for consultation by Wychavon District Council and will be reported to Malvern Hills District Council in January. We're progressing a joint SIL charging schedule, but one important point to note is that we will be required in the fullness of time to adopt it separately because each authority is a separate charging authority. Thank you, Chair.
Duncan, thank you. Any questions or comment to this item, please? Pat Agar.
Thank you, Chair. I think for the benefit of non-planning councillors, it's well worth stressing that both SIL and 106 levies can be charged on the same development, but they have different purposes, slightly different purposes. And one is negotiated at the time, that is the 106, in relation to an application that is made, whereas SIL is a fixed list once we decide on it. And that's upfront, developers know what they've got to pay. So, you know, the viability issues don't tend to arise at the application stage when we're applying SIL because they already know, whereas they might arise when we're looking at 106 levies. But the fact is that we need the money to support our infrastructure, and there will be a funding gap. It varies from time to time as to what we think it will be, but this isn't intended to fill the entire gap. That's all I can really tell you at the moment.
Thank you, Pat. I think that's very helpful, actually, that bit of fill in there. I mean, I think this is a perfectly sensible update. I'm happy to support it. Anyone else want to make any comment as we speak? Okay. In that instance then, we've got, as Duncan has said, the recommendation 1.1, 1.2, as before you. Show of hands, please, those in acceptance.
Yes.
Great, thanks very much, Duncan, thank you. We move to agenda item 8, the Shrub Hill CPO order. Who's teeing it up? Kevin? Kevin?
Thank you. This report recommends the making of a compulsory purchase order to ensure the acquisition of land and rights necessary to build a shared use route from Shub Hill Station to Pheasant Street through Cromwell Street, 5 metre wide shared use route for pedestrians and cyclists. You will know that this has been a proposal in the development plan and the city centre master plan, and as a project was one of the Towns Fund approved projects for which we now have funding for. The report is fairly lengthy in providing a description of the project, description of the land to be acquired, which is primarily land which falls either within the First Bus garage site or the Shub Hill Retail Park, plus parcels of underused and fairly scrappy land. Compulsory purchase is always a matter of last resort or not to be used until as a last resort, but government advice recommends that it's in order for local authorities to pursue a compulsory purchase order to act as a backstop to ensure land acquisition. We have opened negotiations with all those with an interest in land, and some of those negotiations are going well. And I say the making of the compulsory purchase order is there to ensure that if needs be, we can build the shared use route in line with our ambitions and in line with the timescales set out by Towns Fund. So the report sets out the justification for the scheme. It sets out the powers to be used for the making of the compulsory purchase order, which in this instance would be section 226 of the Town and Country Planning Act. That requires the council not to exercise those powers unless it is convinced that the scheme will be for the benefit of the social, economic and environmental well-being of the area. And the report sets out how the proposal will bring that about, in that this link is a necessary part of the regeneration of Shub Hill and the economic benefits that come out from that. It will provide social benefits in that it will provide a far easier route for persons of all abilities from the station into the town centre, and has environmental benefits in that it will tidy up a very untidy area of the city at the moment, and the planting and landscaping that is associated with the scheme will add to there'll be a biodiversity net gain to that. You'll know that the scheme was granted planning consent in September, and as I mentioned, it is a Towns Fund project, and there's full funding for land acquisition and the construction of the scheme. So subject to land acquisition, the deliverability of the scheme is pretty much assured. It's a fairly lengthy recommendation to make compulsory purchase order for the acquisition of land and also rights over adjoining land for the purposes of constructing. So that land is more particularly described on the larger scale plan displayed here. And there are associated delegations to be able to, for the service of notices and the undertaking of negotiations and conveying of land and negotiating away any objections. So that's the report in a nutshell, but obviously happy to answer any questions.
Kevin, many thanks. Any questions, comment from the floor? Lynn.
Thank you. Yes, it is a lengthy recommendation, but it is about putting legal process in place. Yes, very supportive of the concept of having an improved access from Shrub Hill Station down into town. As you described, you know, there's, in terms of active travel, improving the pedestrian route, the cycling route, and I think, you know, at previous meetings also flagged up with the shared bike scheme coming. That could be a really powerful place to have installations on that, you know, and supporting health and well-being and supporting people to become more active. What we're looking at is the compulsory purchase order, and I'm supportive of this because I think it's partly actually about learning from some of our previous projects where, in order to acquire property, there's been a lengthy process, and in that process, you know, the cost of some of that acquisition has gone up. So, you know, if this is a way of preventing somebody's profiteering, if I can use that word, from actually the public purse, then absolutely in support of it. And, you know, we need this project to progress to the time scale of the other funding that we have, and make sure it doesn't get held up. So yeah, fully support.
Thank you. Stephen Hodgson.
Yeah, I support the scheme. I think it is a good idea, and it won't just benefit people coming from Shrub Hill Station, but it will also benefit people from the eastern part of the city in general, because I know when I've been talking to people about the bicycle rental scheme we're putting in the spring this year, people say, oh yes, but you haven't got the cycle infrastructure in Worcester for this. Well, schemes like this are part of actually getting that cycle infrastructure in place, and that. And from the part of the city that I live and represent in Warner Parish North, people will be able to use the canal towpath to get to the city centre, and actually this will actually give a good link from the canal into the city centre via St Martin's Quarter, and I think will also benefit St Martin's Quarter as well, because I think apart from Asda, I think some of the shops there have actually suffered a bit because they're not getting necessarily full footfall that they could actually get. So I think it is a really, really good scheme, and it will hopefully help to regenerate that part of the city.
Agreed. Further comment? Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to see with the delivering funding that we're saying that the 10 million Towns Fund grant means that there won't be a further contribution required from the authority. If something unexpected comes up, I presume it will come back to a committee or to seek further funding, and it won't just, you know, go over budget. Thank you.
That's correct. It's obviously the 10 million of Towns Fund was for other projects in addition to this particular one. So if there were cost pressures on the shared use link, it'd be a matter of kind of reassigning our priorities across what we're doing at Shrub Hill to make sure that this took place.
Thank you, Kevin. Any further? Sorry, Marjorie, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely welcome this this route between the station and the city centre. My only quibble is that it ends on Pheasant Street. You're not really quite in the city centre there, and there doesn't seem to be very. I'm probably raising this at the wrong meeting, but there doesn't seem to be any very obvious way of getting right into the city centre apart from going round Asda. So, have you thought about what you do when you get to Pheasant Street? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, obviously at the moment you can continue directly into St Martin's Quarter through underneath the Asda multi-storey car park.
Okay.
That is a direct route through the multi-storey car park. It is it's not a particularly attractive route at the moment, and subject to there being sufficient funding within the Towns Fund envelope, which at the moment there is, because that was one of the proposals. The proposal would be to improve the environment, improve the ambience of that of that walkthrough. You know, we have had discussions with ASDA about, you know, painting the floor, painting the walls, providing a false ceiling and new lighting there. And that's a proposal that will be kind of worked up in due course. I haven't put it as part of this report because there are no land acquisition issues there. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, I mean, I'd just like to say again, I mean, this is something I fully support. It's been a piece of land that's been crying out for this level of investment for some considerable time, and I'm delighted that we're now moving in the right direction. So for the recommendations, again, it's 1.1 through to 1.37. On a show of hands, please, those in acceptance.
That is carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, and Kevin, thank you. We move to agenda item 9, safe and legal routes. Is that one yours, Roy?
Thank you, Chair. Members, this is a noting report and informs you of the recent use of Managing Director's urgency powers in enabling us to respond to a Home Office consultation on safe and legal routes. Consultation opened on the 20th of October and closed on the 15th of December. Just 2 points of clarity. When setting a cap, the Home Office are statutorily obliged to consult with councils, which is what they're doing in this case. And just for clarity as well, safe and legal routes are defined as sanctioned immigration provisions, not unsanctioned. So these are formal sanctioned routes, processes that are in place for people to come into the UK for humanitarian reasons. So in simple terms, the government are asking us how many individuals we would be able to accommodate during the calendar year 2025 for 3 existing immigration schemes. They are the UK Resettlement Scheme, the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme, and the Community Sponsorship Scheme. Now, obviously, there are a number of other schemes as well, and we talk about these in the report just to give members a little bit of background on them. But again, schemes such as Homes for Ukraine, they aren't included within this consultation. It's just the 3 schemes that I've mentioned. Worcestershire County Council operate a resettlement service across the county, and we felt it was useful or wise for them to lead on coordinating with district councils and the VCS in developing some option for us to be able to respond to the consultation. And they also have oversight of all the work that goes on across the county. 4 options were developed, and they're set out at paragraph 3.7 of the report. And these were presented to Worcestershire Leaders Board at the end of November, which our joint leaders attend. In considering his use of urgency powers, the Managing Director briefed our joint leaders on the topic and the options ahead of the Leaders Board meeting. At Leaders Board, unanimous support was confirmed for option 4, the basis of which was a single response to be submitted on behalf of all councils in Worcestershire, proposing a county-wide figure and with procurement of properties continued to be done by the resettlement service at County Council. That works very well, so why change it? The number of individuals that have been committed to across the county is 35, and no more than 2 properties are to be procured in any one district. Importantly, the caveat that we've added as part of the submission is that no social rented properties are to be procured from the social rented sector. And as we've set out in the report, you can see the demand for social housing across the county and the numbers of families that are in temporary accommodation. So that's the reason we felt that procurement should only take place from the private rented sector and not the social rented sector. And given that it's going to be about 12, 13 properties, we don't feel that will have an impact on the private rented sector across the county. A final report on the consultation will be produced by the Home Office, and we'll brief members on that when it comes out. And government will need to lay a statutory instrument in the summer in order to put in place the cap ahead of January 2025. So because we were unable to bring a decision item on this to a committee in time, Managing Director's urgency powers have been used. This is the first committee we've had the opportunity to report back to in line with the Council's constitution. So happy to stop there, Chair. Take any questions.
Very much. Any questions or comment, please? Anything at all? Right. In which case, I will have offer it? You all happy to note? Yes? Right, thank you. Thank you, Lloyd. We'll move to agenda item 10, electric cremators funding application. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the context to this report is that officers have submitted a grant application which we expect to be determined in the new year with a very short window for acceptance. So the report asks members to delegate the authority to accept the grant should an offer be made. And of course, that will be subject to consideration of any and all conditions that are attached to such a grant offer. Members will be aware that the cremators at Astwood Crematorium are approaching the end of their life and require replacing. There's also a high likelihood of some new statutory environmental targets around emissions abatements being applied to existing crematoria, and our cremators will not take a retrofit of the equipment required for that. So the cremators are at a point that they will need replacing within the next few number of years. Back in March, Environment Committee approved the commissioning of a technical feasibility study to look at the operation at Astwood and see whether the operations could be run with two cremators rather than three, which is what is there at present. Those results of that study came to Environment Committee in July, and members have approved the development of a detailed and fully costed design for refurbishment of the crematorium and replacement of the cremators. So that work is underway. A project manager has been appointed, budget was set, and a design team is being procured, and the detail on that will be brought to a future meeting of the committee. The report at 2.5 to 2.7 explains elements of the refurbishment, but pertinent to tonight's report is that the study into refurbishment is also looking at the replacement of the cremators. There's a correction for you at 2.8. Our cremators were actually installed in 1998, not 1988. They're still quite elderly, but not quite as old as that. At the Environment Committee, members expressed a preference in the debate for gas-fired cremators to be replaced by electric cremators, but a decision in respect of that is dependent on conclusions of the study and a full business case for the various options. Section 3 talks about the potential grant funding operated by a government agency known as SALIX, which is the shorthand for this grant, and it offers grant funding to bridge the affordability gap between traditional conventional technology and more costly low carbon solutions. So the difference between purchase cost of 2 electric cremators or gas cremators, the additional for 2 electric cremators is around £1.5 million. The ongoing revenue costs of operating electric cremators are approximately £10,000 per annum lower than gas cremators, based on the cost of energy usage and maintenance. And clearly their carbon footprint is considerably lower than that of gas. 3.3 sets out the cost of borrowing the difference, the additional money for electric cremators. That would be approximately £70,000 a year over and above the costs for gas cremators. So there's a net impact of electric of approximately £60,000 per annum was the council to go ahead with that without any grant funding. This SALIX grant scheme is intended to bridge that affordability gap, which would mean that there would be a cost neutral implication on selecting electric over gas. So accordingly, officers have submitted a grant application. That will include modern abatement plant fitted to those cremators, a heat exchanger which will enable the heat to be used to heat the rest of the crematorium building, and the necessary works around that. So a bid for 1.55 million has been submitted, as says at 3.6. And at 3.7, we've been told that the grant offer, should one be made, will be no later than the 31st of March, potentially early in the new year. Officers have had some discussions this week actually with the funding organisation, which we're optimistically positive about, but we won't know for sure until we actually receive that grant offer. So therefore, we're asking tonight for a delegated decision to proceed to accept the grant offer, delegated to corporate directors in consultation with chair and vice chair, should that offer be made. And that, of course, is subject to conditions on the grant being acceptable and not fettering other decisions regarding refurbishment of the crematorium. So the implications are laid out in the report. Chair, I'll leave it there and take questions.
David, many thanks. Questions or comment, please? Karen.
Thank you, Chair. As Chair of Environment Committee, this is a project that I'm obviously very excited about because the crematories contribute to a significant proportion of our carbon for the city. But it's also, you did talk about the actual improvement to the building as well, which will provide a much better service for our customers as well, which will make it a lot more attractive. And I think that's really important. I went to a service, Councillor Dunn did last week as well, for residents who'd lost loved ones this year. And you can see how important it is for us to provide a pleasant as possible environment for people who are distressed. So the project as a whole, I think, is extremely positive, and we shouldn't really underestimate the importance of it in many aspects. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments, please? Adrian.
Could you just clarify why we're being asked to do this, David? Because is it because the turnaround that is expected if we're successful in the grant, turnaround is too tight for us to be able to convene a committee because we don't know precise date of the decision? That's purely it. I mean, it strikes me that if that is the case, that's the case for a lot of grant applications that the council enters into. In which case we're almost giving, does this set a precedent for giving carte blanche to do things without a more detailed member investigation?
Through you, Chair. You're quite right, Councillor Gregson, that the reason we brought this is because of the tight turnaround on this one. I think this one's probably unusual that they have specified that the turnaround will be 10 working days and are not really giving us an indication of when that decision is likely to be made. So potentially looking at the committee cycle, we could have found ourselves in a difficult position very early in the new year. I mean, I look to colleagues, but I don't think this necessarily sets a precedent for future submissions. This is an unusual one and one we thought quite hard about what decision we needed to bring to the committee, but we felt the best option was the one that's before you tonight.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Lyndon.
I mean, it just kind of begs the reasonableness of 10 days as a turnaround, isn't it? Which I don't know exactly who SALICs are, but it doesn't take account of any democratic cycle. Whether you're a committee system or a cabinet system, it appears to assume that someone can just sign off an agreement to 1.5 million, which is
Yeah, just noting the comments around the turnaround time. When we had the call yesterday with SALEX officials, this is in no way suggests we will get a grant or not, but they were very pleased with how we were dealing with this from a governance point of view. I think the feedback was that a number of organisations who get this grant offer then panic as to what to do. And the fact that we were taking it to a committee this evening and asking for delegation to receive the grant and laying as much information as we possibly could in front of members, I think they've taken that away as best practice.
well done, team.
Agreed again. Any further questions or comment? In which case, go to the recommendation. I'm assuming you've all read it and David has already gone through it. So show of hands, please. Those in favour?
Yes, carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David. To agenda item 11, Tudor House surrender and regrants of lease.
Thank you, Chair. This is a happy little item. The Tudor House, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, is run by Worcester Heritage and Amenity Trust, and they've done a very, very good job since they took it over in 2008 and looking after it and building it up and investing in it, and it's now running very, very well. And the last thing we'd want to do is disturb that situation. They came to us about 3 months or so ago and asked, rather than having this arrangement whereby we have a 125-year lease and they pay us £1 a year if demanded in rent, we simply transfer the asset to them. The issue with that is if we transfer the freehold to them, then we can have no say in what happens to it in the future. So we want to retain that say because we want to retain the asset for its current use. So after some degree of discussions and negotiation, we settled on the idea of a 999-year lease instead, which gives them all the security they want going forward. I mean, who knows where we'll be in 999 years' time, gives us all the security that we want. So they've accepted that as a principle. There are a few bits to do in terms of finishing the lease, etc., but that's been agreed. I've brought it to the committee just because normally when you do this kind of surrender and regrant, there is a loss to the lessee. You know, we're actually losing out financially by extending the terms of the grant because it doesn't give us the opportunity to review the rent, etc., etc. But in compensation for that, they have invested 93,500 in recent times, and they are planning to invest more than that in the coming years to convert some of the external buildings and repair the heating system. So it seems to me that the value that we're getting from that is more than offsetting the loss we're incurring in terms of extending the lease, the nominal loss. So I brought it forward really in the interests of transparency, just that members are aware that this decision is being taken. There is a financial implication, but I think that that is, as I say, offset by the value that we're getting from the proposal. So it's just for members to note that we've made this change, and hopefully the trust continue to manage the museum going forward very happily. Thank you, Chair.
Jane, thanks very much. Anyone? Eleanor?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm really interested by this report, but can I just ask for one clarification? Now that the charity has a longer lease, does this mean that they could take a charge out against the property, and will that affect the council going forward?
I'm not sure what you mean by a charge.
So if they wanted to borrow funds and use the asset as security for taking out a loan, if they want to do any improvements, something like that?
They see it more from the point of view of giving security to funding bodies, that they'll be able to easier to obtain grants because they've got long-term security over the asset. That was the argument that they put forward. I mean, we could make a condition of that in the lease in terms of restricting their use of the property for agreed purposes.
Yeah, I think I'd feel a bit more comfortable with that, because that lease could give them the security and the tenure that they could then apply for funding. And I think we need to have a condition there that can't be done, because I think the council could be at risk. I don't know, Sean, what do you think?
I mean, I have to say a 999-year lease is very unusual. And we are securing some external legal advice on the terms, because I share your reservations about the future dealings point. And the Law of Property Act is 1925. We're contemplating 1,000 years of occupation. Restriction on future dealings, definitely an issue. Permitted user clause, very tight around this as an open heritage attraction. I think permission to deal and landlord's consent is an essential part of the mechanism which needs to remain. So I agree with you, and we need to make sure that that is understood by the trustees, because I think it's quite reasonable for the lessees to expect to have a relationship with the landlord where they approach the landlord for consent on certain matters. And I don't think we want to lose that principle. I think that's very important. So yes, it's certainly an unusual situation, Councillor Round. I do agree.
Jabba.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I suppose in similar vein, if there was a reform of the Housing Act and leasehold laws, how would that affect our dealings in this commercial setting. So if leaseholds, for example, the government decides to eliminate leasehold agreements, and how would that affect this deal?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it is very hard to contemplate how changes in law could impact on such a long-term interest that isn't a freehold. And that's one of the reasons why we will do our best in terms of the lease we put in place. But as I said, I would stress it is an unusual arrangement in that regard. In practical terms, I think what would happen if the changes were of significant magnitude would be that primary legislation would change the effect of all the private arrangements around the country. Primary legislation would effectively determine how leases should then be interpreted in light of new legislation. So it would sort of be done unto us on all long-term leases. I think that the way for the council to try and retain security and visibility in a practical sense is to maintain the mechanism of landlord's consent to any variations or changes. I think that's going to be essential.
Just for my clarity, Sean, so that principle then basically sort of wraps everything else into that. There's a sort of package, essentially. The points that Jabra has made and Eleanor has made could be adequately dealt with under that heading. Well,
Largely, Chair, though, as I say, I probably hear the hesitation in my advice. You know, it's a commercial arrangement essentially at arm's length, and the tenant gets the ability to have quiet enjoyment and possession and so forth. So our rights are fettered by this arrangement. But to keep sighted on what the intentions are is around landlord's consent to change, I think. That's going to be our most effective mechanism. Sorry to be slightly equivocal, but I have to give my best advice to committee, and I have to say it's an unusual arrangement.
Just to say what a happy outcome from what started off as a very fraught battle almost. So well done to everybody concerned.
So, yeah. Okay, Altaf.
Yes, as being a private landlord, I mean, I've bought several properties as a leasehold. I've had 99-year lease, I've had 999-year lease, but the whole point is having these leases that you can go to the bank and get funds on those premises. So commercially wise, it's the property is commercially, I think that should be right for them if they want to raise money on that property.
So, I mean, there's a sort of something emerging. Is there something we need to build in specifically here, or are we content to simply contain it within? Eleanor, again, sorry.
Yes, sorry. I have to be honest. You know, with my background in property and property law, I'm really, and I've no disrespect to Sean at all, I'm really concerned. I think landlord's consent has been tested in case law, and withholding landlord's consent is a potential grey area. I think officer has alluded to the fact that we could have no dealings taking place, but I think the council is exposed potentially here, and I just wonder whether it's a difficult one. With my lawyer hat on, I'm just wondering whether the council is potentially exposed and whether we need to be having external advice to make sure that we're completely comfortable. I'm really quite concerned, if I'm honest, as to what could go wrong here.
Through you, Chair. I agree it's an important issue to get right, and I have been speaking to external lawyers about putting the lease out. I'm happy through Chair and Vice Chairs to share the advice before we commit signature.
Councillor Altaf, through you, Chair. Councillor Altaf does have a point, as does Councillor Rand. I mean, I think the whole aim of us giving this lease to an extended lease is to give the charity the security that it needs to run the operation effectively. And if that means that they are then able to raise funds as a result of it to keep that charity going and to keep that heritage asset going, then that's the whole intended purpose of us giving the lease, if you see what I'm saying. So, you know, in our attempt to to give them the security, we giving with one hand and taking with the other, it doesn't seem quite right. So any restrictions that we do place on the covenant within that lease can't be too restrictive as to effectively constrain their hands from operating the model that they operate.
And then
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think it is, I appreciate the concerns that are being raised, and I do think that it's just important to recall why we got to this point in the first place, which was the council couldn't afford to maintain the building. You know, we would have offloaded it. It could have been knocked down and built into any kind of steel office block that the planning committee thought was appropriate on that street, and we wouldn't even be talking about it anymore. What we have achieved through partnerships over the last 30 years in this area is that we've maintained a museum which is open for free to the public, tells the story of Worcester, and is building and increasing and developing that story, is successfully applying for grants and has Heritage Lottery support on a number of areas, and is a major, component of what the city offers in terms of its heritage and its tourism appeal. I think that we need to take that into account, because if they weren't doing it, would we? And the answer to that, frankly, is no.
Okay, it's a fair comment. Is it something you wanted to pick up there, Sean, before we go to Karen?
No, I don't think so, thanks, Chair. I mean,
Okay.
I think the obviously the current use is a very happy situation for everybody, and I think it's making sure that the leasehold documentation empowers funding but protects the current use.
Karen Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if it's possible to bring it to the group leaders meeting, otherwise we don't get a say.
Yes, I have no objection. I mean, we are progressing this during January, so I can provide the legal advice through the group leaders meeting in January.
Way forward. Any further questions, Lynn?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of pull together some of the threads, the history and so on, this has been, if you like, a bone of contention between Worcester Municipal Charities and the council. And it was kind of on that basis that actually, as joint leaders, Marjorie and I were approached to kind of find a way forward. Taking the advice of officers, I appreciate that it is an unusual arrangement, and there was perhaps some controversy or some differences of opinion, but at the end of the day, it is about actually who is the best custodian of this very old, very special building. And I think, I'd have to say that history would suggest that municipal charities have done a far better job of looking after it than the council would have. And it is about securing that asset in every single, in every possible way going forwards.
Anything else anyone wants to raise? Seeing any raised hands? So essentially, if members are happy to just note the paper as it stands, and then there will be an evolving narrative going through January that will be brought to group leaders. Okay, happy to do that? Right, thanks very much. And to conclude the evening, we go to item 12, review of small grants arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. Members will recall back at our meeting on 25th of July, we revised our approach to small grants. So we reduced the amount that was available to 45,000 to be funded from UKSPF for the coming year, this is 24-25, and reduced the amount that could be applied for to 2,000, and reduced the window for applying to the autumn. So we're trying an approach whereby we are bringing together all of the applicants into one place and then making a decision between them rather than using a first come first serve approach. Well, the conclusion of that is that we had a dozen or so applications, some of which weren't at all relevant and some of which were not sufficiently within the terms of the grant to be allowed. And ultimately, we've agreed 6, I think, that are listed there under paragraph 3.2, which meet the terms of the grant, which are acceptable in every respect and meet the criteria. So those are proposed to go forward. You'll notice that the total there is 9,946, so there is a significant amount of money left over. So the question really arises as to what to do with what's left, 35,054. Originally, in July, what we suggested was that we would carry forward that into next year. But as this is funded by UK SPF, as we stand, we aren't guaranteed to get any UK SPF funding next year, so we might not be able to carry it forward. So there's a risk if we do that. So its better option is to actually defray it during the coming financial year rather than carrying it forward. If we do that, the 3 options which are given there on 4.3, first of all, is just to run the bidding process again in exactly the same way and do a further call for bids and see what happens. Option 3 gives us something which is a bit more targeted, which is to add that to the 25,000 made available for miscellaneous grants that come through during the year. So they could be small grants and larger value ones. And then option 4, which is at 4.5, agrees to that, but actually removes from it 11,500, which we could use to mitigate another committee decision, which was to reduce a couple of medium grants, because those were to be reduced next year. But we've not been able to get into a proper discussion with those recipients of those grants. So that would actually make it very difficult now in the current circumstances. So I'm proposing to buy a little time in respect of that one, to not implement that recommendation and remove that 11,500, which would mean, if my maths are correct, that there is 23,554 to add to the 25,000 already available to produce a pot for 24-25 for miscellaneous applications when they come through. And we want to ensure that those who are likely to apply for the small grants are aware of that and would be able to apply for this funding as well.
Shane, thank you. Any questions or comment? Adrian.
Just by going through that process, I've realised I should declare an interest in this item.
Sorry, Chair, do we have to be clear exactly which option we are agreeing to, if you see what I mean, because it's not listed there. I think it's kind of a blend of option 3 and 4, effectively, isn't it? That's okay.
If I can, Chair, just to help out. So paragraph 5.1, that's what's proposed there. So it's option 4, with the remaining funding to be allocated in line with option 3. Yeah, so that's